Rob Rutz, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
There is some discussion about differences in terminology between CSR, social innovation, social economic innovation. What do you see as being the most salient phraseology for talking about working with communities outside of perhaps some of your traditional customers?
Well, the whole thing has developed. I mean, when we started to work in this arena, which is probably over 20 years ago, we talked about sustainable development. And sustainable development at the time for us had three legs. One was economic, financial performance. The other leg was the environment. And the third one was social impact. And I think when you talk about CSR, it actually still today covers those same areas. Right? We have a board committee at Royal Dutch Shell that is called the Corporate Social Responsibility Committee, and it covers everything that I just talked about. The innovation end of it is maybe a new twist to it. That is pretending that we haven't been innovative so far, but there is a lot of stuff happening in this arena, so to put that on a different pedestal is probably the right thing to do.
Shell has many initiatives going back from Global Solutions, which is something that you headed up a number of years ago. What does it take to get companies who have not bought into the idea of social innovation or corporate social responsibility? What does it take to pull them into that group?
There's a couple of ways for it to happen. A crisis is one way, right? So you have some kind of an environmental event that could drive you to a point like this. Many people will tell you that the Brand Spar event, in our case, where we had a difference of opinion with Greenpeace in the North Sea between UK and Holland, has driven us there. Yes, in part, that has certainly helped us. So that's one way of doing it, but the best way of making this happen is leaders taking that upon themselves. So the leaders of big corporations having the social conscience and the environmental conscience to make this happen.
One of the approaches that is now considered more closely is how to actually drive the bottom line, or at least part of the bottom line from social innovation. How does that work for Shell? How do you get, let's say, economic return off of some of your social initiatives or your CSR initiatives?
Well, there's almost an economic curve to this stuff. There's actually some of the things that we're doing actually have a good payout, right? If I, for example, look at my refineries, and I'm able to conserve energy in the refineries. Those refineries were built when oil was $2 or $3 a barrel. Now, where we are today at $50, $60 a barrel, fuel savings are a lot more paying than they were 10, 20 years ago. So for us to install the equipment that can recover that heat is important. So there you go. That's one that is very, very helpful. There are other areas that are still very expensive. If, for instance, we think about carbon sequestration, where we would take out the CO2 out of our furnaces and inject that under cities or under oceans. That is expensive and would be the last resort, so to speak. So there is an economic curve in which you do this kind of thing, and eventually, I mean, to take CO2 again, depending on where the cost and the price of carbon is going to be, things like this will start to happen. So they get an economic payout.
You mentioned earlier that you've seen a change in the past 3 or 4 years on a broader scale in terms of how companies are viewing these initiatives and the importance they're now starting to place on them. Talk a little bit about that. Why do you think we've seen that change just so very recently, and how deep is the change in your opinion?
Well, companies react to a number of things. First of all, they react to their investors. And what we're seeing that is many of the bigger investment firms actually start to look at corporate social responsibility. And actually, there is a discussion when I meet with investors around this stuff as well. There's still a good part of the investors that is interested in tomorrow and the next quarter. But there's a growing group of investors actually that takes more interest in the longer term and what we do in this arena. The other part that is pushing you is your employees. I mean, they have to see their friends, their families, and explain to them what the company is doing and where it's going, and the customers as well. I mean, the customers are coming to us today to help them reduce their energy use. Yeah, that was very relevant when crude was $150. I mean, we did a lot of work in that period. So in a way, it's still driven by price to a large extent, But whatever the reason is, if we can help, if we can become a better operator because of high price, that's a good reason to do it, isn't it?
This is another discussion that's very topical, and that is 6 months ago, everyone was automatically jumping on the green bandwagon, the alternative sources of energy bandwagon, and I don't mean that derisively. It's a real and important thing. Now, with oil prices half of what they were at that time, are you seeing people, your customers, for example, pull away or step back from feeling the need to explore other sources?
It's not the oil price that has done that. I mean, what has basically thrown us out was the fact that the fuel and food debate came in. So all of a sudden food prices started to rise, and of course biofuels were blamed for it, right? Now, if you look at the real reasons behind why the food prices came up, is that all of a sudden people in India started to eat 2 bowls of rice a day rather than 1. So it's simply a demand on the food side that made it rise. Secondly, what people don't realize is that, for instance, in wheat production, 50% of the input of the cost of wheat production is energy. So when oil prices go up, wheat prices go up. Biofuels will have an impact, but not as bad as the people think about. But it's all hyped up by the media and some of the NGOs out there. And what you get as a result of that is that biofuels moves from a hero and a world savior 2 years ago to a ban today. You should use that stuff because we're taking food out of the people's mouth in Africa, right? You can operate this stuff responsibly, and I think it's our task and our duty to actually make that happen, and we're in the process of doing that.
I think some of the biofuels debate, though, as I understand it, has not necessarily been that biofuels are bad, it's which crops you're using to make them, and for example, are using corn, which is a low-yield biofuel source, versus cane.
Yeah, sugarcane is A, much more efficient, B, produces an ethanol that emits 90% less CO2 than your usual hydrocarbons. If you look at corn, that number is more like 40%, 50%. And it's less efficient to do it as well. And it drives corn prices up in the US because there it has a material impact. So today, 20% of the corn production in the US goes into ethanol production. So you look at the sugar production in Brazil, it's a very, very different situation. Only 6% of the land in Brazil is actually, the agricultural land in Brazil is sugarcane. So it is more efficient. Yeah, so that debate is always there, but that will sort itself out. In the end, the best economic solution is going to win.
The market forces will win, yeah. As you look forward and as you try to further develop some of these public and private initiatives with Shell and your stakeholders, what do you see is the way forward? What direction do you need to go in developing socially responsible programs? What's next?
Well, we need to continue to work on the programs that we have today, and we need to make it very clear with governments what the expectations are, because governments are very important in this whole arena. If they cannot change the rules from one day to the other, for instance, like they did on biofuels. One day you have a 10% mandate, the next day it's 5% or less. And we are investing big dollars in order to meet those mandates. So I think the next steps, because now the expensive steps are coming, is to actually agree with governments in the world as to what is going to be needed. If Europe has a carbon trading system that is going to be fundamentally different than the carbon trading in the US, or Europe is going to force our industry, for example, into buying credits for refining, and Singapore doesn't, guess where the refining industry is going to move, right? And it doesn't help the world in the end if that plan is going to move from Y to Z. So what we need is a set of rules, and hopefully Copenhagen is going to help in some way in that are going to make it possible for us to operate and to continue the programs that we want to get into.
With your company being so large and so global, do you approach social innovation, or in fact CSR, differently in terms of the needs in Asia versus North America versus Europe?
No, it's basically whatever standards we have in a company are being applied everywhere.
Because you talked earlier about the economic, social, and environmental. I mean, those are the three pins, and so then develop programs around that.
Yes.
You talked about earlier today in the session about your refinery in China and how that all came together in terms of working with the communities. Do you have other stories like that, other examples like that, or if you'd like to revisit that example, that's okay too?
No, that's certainly one example where we worked close together with the communities, with our partner, in order to get all of that resolved. Another one is oil sands. There's many question marks around oil sands in the market. It's a much better alternative than coal burning. And if you look at what we have in place, first of all, we have involved the First Nation people, or the original people that lived there, in what we're going to do in the area. So where are we going to mine? What river do we? Which river don't we touch? What is the footprint of this industry is going to be, and what is the job creation that will come with that for the First Nations people? Right. So that is the first debate before you even start building anything. That's part of your permitting process in Canada. So that's step number one. And step number two is you have to develop the plans out there that are going to return that land to its original state. So while we're digging big holes out there right now, the overburden, so the earth that is above the oil sands, which is about 20 foot, is set aside, trucked to a different place. Then we harvest the oil sand. We take oil out of the sand. Sand goes back into the mine, and the overburden is put on top of it again, and we grow trees. So 60 years from now, you walk in that area and you wouldn't know that there's ever been a mine. And that's our approach to this whole arena. And in a way, we've been standard setting. If you look at there was some NGOs that have been doing standards or benchmarking for those operations in Canada, and we came out on top. So we tried to do the right thing for the community.
Rob Routs, Dutch Shell, thank you for your time.
Pleasure, thank you.